What the exhibit is at the Rawls Museum in Cortland is 45 years of painting. And even though I taught photography and was involved in photography and printmaking at the University of Mary Washington, my primary interest has always been painting. So in this exhibit, you won't see any of the photography. It'd be hard to kind of go back and count what I've done, but I've been a pretty active artist probably since high school, really. I made a little milk money decorating people's folders and things like that. So I've been interested in art ever since an early age. I wasn't sure what to do with that until I got to university level, college level. And then I started to study it seriously. I started in a small school in Wisconsin in 1965 and ended up at the University of Wisconsin later in the 70s with a master's degree. In Whitewater, Wisconsin at the time, there was a lot of unrest, just political unrest and everything else. And it led to the firing of the printmaking teacher for reasons that were dealt with censorship in a faculty show. And he promptly got hired as the chairman at the University of South Dakota. And what he did was turn around and hire everyone from Whitewater. So we literally moved that department from Whitewater, Wisconsin to Vermillion, South Dakota. When I was going to school in South Dakota in the late 60s, the Whitney Museum started an independent study program. And I applied to that and got in. And it was the first year they did that. It was 1968. And they took 12 students from around the country and gave them studio space and brought in artists to come and critique your work. And that was a really eye-opening experience. It was almost overwhelming because that's when I started to do photography. In the show, in the exhibit, there's a painting when you first walk in the gallery that I did in 1965, which is one of the earliest surviving paintings. And then there's a big gap between 1965 and 1976. When I was painting in the last year I was in South Dakota, I did some very large figurative work. And it was the first time I think I'd concentrated on a particular kind of painting for probably 20 or 30 paintings, large ones. And I shipped those to New York when I went there, intending to kind of continue with that idea. Well, back then UPS wasn't really around and FedEx, so I went to Yellow Freight, and I rolled them up in a big roll and made a crate, and of course being a student and having not much money, never thought about insuring it. There are 15 or 16 paintings from that series I kept, which were the best ones, that just disappeared. So I don't know what really happened to them. So it made me, in some ways it might have been a good thing, because instead of just continuing with what I had planned to continue with, I started to do photography because it seemed to be a little more immediate and easier to work with at the size. And there was a darkroom at this school, and I began to just start to spend the time doing that with the intention of maybe turning it into something else later. I had gotten interested in photography in South Dakota because I was doing pictures of models, and instead of hiring them to sit for hours, I would just take photographs and develop my own photographs, which was a little easier. So I kept doing that, and I got involved with in New York and taking photos of other artists' work, and kind of made a few dollars on the side doing that. I was, a lot of those artists I was familiar with, just reading the art magazines. Of course, Andy Warhol was very active then, and Frank Stella and people like that. And I did get to go visit some of the studios, which was very nice. The Whitney had connections. But again, it was so overwhelming in a sense. I couldn't concentrate, I didn't think, on my own work that much. I kept doing photography, and I did some kind of large-scale black and white prints that I hand-tinted. And there was a gallery there at the time, Jill Kornblatt, and I don't think, she was an elderly woman then, and I don't know how long she stayed in business, but she liked the work and actually bought some of the things for herself. And I thought maybe I'd have an in the gallery set up there, but it didn't work out. And I'm not a big city dweller. Well, I live in Colonial Beach now, and I like it here. There are some people that are sort of thrive in the big city, and I was not one of those. I think it's kind of normal to start with realism in a sense, where you're looking at something to work from. I think abstraction is in some ways more difficult to work with. I've known artists that have been painting as long as I have that have stayed with the same style. There's nothing wrong with that either. They just seem to get a little better at it. But if you look at an early work and a later work, they're pretty much the same. I think partly my changes are just partly my personality, that I get, I study something for a while or work in a certain direction for a while, and then it starts to slowly change, and I sometimes make big leaps and sometimes small leaps, but I can't kind of stay in one spot for very long. The other element in that is being a teacher for so many years, having to do many different things for demonstrations or whatever it is, that you're kind of spread thin as far as doing a little bit of everything. And I think that affected my work somewhat. Teaching was always a good option because it kept me involved in the process, and I think I was a good teacher, and I was able to get across to students, and I did have a wide range of sort of skills to kind of teach. So that was always on my mind, although at the time, in the early 70s, it was kind of like what we're going through now as far as employment goes. So it took me a few years. I said, I'll maybe get another job. I painted houses and did things like that, and then I said, no. Well, I went from Wisconsin. I taught at a technical school there while I was in graduate school, and then I got my first full-time teaching job in Alabama, a little college, Jacksonville State University. It was a good experience, I think, but I knew I wasn't going to be there for a long time. And when I left there, I had a contact at VCU in Richmond. It wasn't a full-time job, but they said they'd give me some adjunct classes, and